Ladies and gentlemen, and this is going to be a very special episode of A to Y. I'm going to be releasing this in a couple different ways. Those of you who don't know, there's currently a revival going on as of Thursday, February 16th, in Asbury University. I talked to my grandfather, who was a witness at the 1970 revival at Asbury University, and then later talked to Caleb Ream, who went down and visited the current revival going on. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on it, check out the second interview. And if you want to hear a really well put together interview, check out the first one. Not to diss on Caleb Ream, he was excellent in the interview, but my grandfather has been doing this for a long time, very articulate. Check out the first one. I'll also try to release a whole version, which will end up being like probably over an hour. So if you want to sit down and watch all of that, you're welcome to. Or not, just check out either video. They're both great. Once again, thank you for watching AY. I'll see you guys next time. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and today is a very different episode of A to Y. I have a very special guest joining me right now. It is my grandfather, Dr. Gary Wright, who was at the first Asbury Revival, which I can now say was the first Asbury Revival because now there have been two. Now, and for those of you who don't know, this guy is my grandfather, and he is the founder of Road Renewal, but his life really changed at the first revival, so we're going to ask him a few questions about it. First one is, well, how are you doing?
Doing great, and it's been fun following the week of revival activity at Asbury again.
Now, why were you there at the 1970 Asbury Revival?
Well, I almost missed it because I was a freshman, and I had really planned to go to a different Christian college with your grandmother, and we were both going to go to this Christian college. But I right at the last minute, I changed. I'd been accepted at Asbury and this other college, and I knew I was supposed to go to Asbury. I just wanted to go to college with your grandmother, and we'd been going together for a good while, and so I went to Asbury as a freshman. Asbury at that time had really strict rules. Didn't like it much. Um, planned. I decided. I think during we were on the quarter system, and during that first quarter, I decided this is going to be my last year here. You know, and because I just was not comfortable there, and found it depressing, and didn't have any kind of similar freedom that I'd had at home with my parents. And I really wasn't a troublemaker. So I found it really restrictive. But I was a freshman, and everybody at Asbury at that time, all 1,200 of us, had an assigned seat in the chapel. And I was assigned, all freshmen were assigned seats in the balcony. The Hughes Auditorium, where the revival is going on now, is exactly the same wooden theater seats. Everything's
You can see it on the pictures I pulled up. It's literally the same layout with the seating
yeah,
and the
yeah,
balcony and the stage. It's crazy.
same color of paint on the walls, and
Yep.
that sort of thing. And the only thing is a little bit different now is a little bit on the stage, uh, because they had a huge, awesome pipe organ, uh, and that's a little bit different now because they've brought modern technology into the pipe organ, and so all that's a little bit different. But that's about the only thing that's changed, and so it's interesting just seeing the pictures this past week, and uh, it's pretty exciting.
So you were there as a freshman at Asbury. What was it like? Because everything I did a bit of quick research on this. From what I read on this first one, it was started like any regular service, and then all of a sudden, a couple students started sharing, and then that
Yeah,
seemed to have this avalanche effect. So what was that like? How did that all happen?
well, let me tell you it was a Tuesday morning, and we had chapel on Tuesdays at 10, Thursdays at 9, and believe it or not, on Saturday mornings at 8 o'clock. And those were required. If you missed more than three, you got to go home and see mom and dad permanently. And so uh, I was in line going in the door near the stairs to the balcony. And these people were talking in front of me. And one of them said, to the other one said, "Did you hear about the prayer meeting last night?" And the other one said, "No." They said, "God told us that revival is going to break out today in chapel." Um, I was sarcastic, thinking, and I didn't say anything. I just thought, wow, oh, we got a prophet running around on campus here, and uh, the, and the other person said, "Well, I heard that uh, Dean Reynolds, which was the academic dean, is having a testimony chapel today." And I thought, with my Quaker background, where you sit sometimes in long periods waiting for somebody to give testimony, uh, I thought this is going to be boring. This was before wireless microphones. Uh, the auditorium seats 1,500 people. How are you going to hear somebody? I immediately had all these negative feelings about it. So I went up to my assigned seat in a really critical attitude. And sure enough, it was a testimony chapel. But the first thing that happened was that the academic dean, Dean Reynolds, he gave his testimony. Now he wasn't vocationally a uh, pastor or minister. He was an academician and pretty normal guy, really. And I think he'd done a little coaching along the way in sports, but he gave his testimony how he came to Christ, and then he opened it up for other people to share. And the longer the chapel went on, the stronger the presence of the Lord came. And by the time it got to the end, you know, I constantly didn't feel right with God. And part of it was just a real inferiority complex that I'd developed. And, I always thought God was mad at me. And most of the time, because I was mad at me. And towards the end there, I got really uncomfortable, because the presence of the Lord is so strong, and I could think of a long list of things that he ought to be upset with me about. And so when the bell rang in the middle of people still giving testimonies, uh, I was ready to go to class for maybe the first time since I'd been on campus. It seemed like a good time to go to class and leave this building. And Dr. Hunter, who was not, he was kind of, I think he was drafted by Dean Reynolds to come help him because they could sense something was about to happen. And I've seen in writing the conversation they had while people are giving their testimony, and they knew God was there himself. And I think he drafted Dr. Hunter to come up and kind of close things out or lead things. And Dr. Hunter got up and he basically just gave an invitation for anyone who sensed they needed to talk to the Lord or apologize to the Lord to come forward to the altar. Well, immediately, I'd say well over 100 or maybe even 200 people crowded around that really long altar there in Hughes Auditorium, and it was on. And when people finished praying and getting peace in their heart at the altar, they started going up to the podium because that's about the only way they could be heard. Because it was very orderly, but yet people are weeping and crying, and not only is the altar full, but people had to move out of the front row of seats, one or two rows, so that people could pray there because they'd run. There was no room at the altar anymore geographically, and people started giving witness to what God had just done in their hearts, and the presence of the Lord just kept increasing to the point that you could feel a physical weight. The word in scripture, the word glory means weight, and the glory of the Lord is heavy. And uh, my experience often with it is I struggle sometimes to breathe in that presence of the Lord. And you go through the Bible and look at, when God shows up in people's lives, they usually hit the ground and are physically impacted as well as emotionally, mentally, spiritually impacted. There's usually a physical. You have Moses back there in the Old Testament saying, when God passed by, and the moment God passed by Moses, he said, "Oh God," he said, it says he fell to the ground and began to repent of sin for the whole nation of Israel, not himself and them. And that's usually the reaction. Uh, you see these crowded altars, and usually, like this last week, you saw people kneeling in the aisles of the auditorium, praying, and often it's because there's no room left up front, and uh, they would sing songs. Another professor who was involved in music got up and would lead in songs, and there were favorites that took place. It lasted 8 days, 24 uh, hours around the clock. And uh, it took me, I think, about a day and a half before I left the auditorium. Uh, you'd go to the restroom and come back. Maybe you would run and get something to drink or a meal. But the reason you hurried back is that such exciting things were being reported. For instance, people would get up and say, they'd tell what God had done for them at the altar, and then they'd say, I'm going to go call and they would name maybe their parents or their brother and sister or a friend, and usually we would stop and pray for that situation, and then they'd leave. And the only way you could call somebody then was to go to the payphone in your dormitory. There wasn't any other, you know. So there was long lines on the payphones, and but then people would come in, burst back in the side door of the auditorium on each side of the stage, and they would often be just that they couldn't contain their joy. And often you'd see the person who was giving their testimony at the podium would just back up and let that other person who just entered the auditorium take over. And they'd start telling how they called home, and the people on the other end of the phone all gave their lives to Christ. I mean, it was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. And it was just amazing. And um, I've never gotten over it, Addison. I've never gotten over it.
Life changing experience for sure. And one of the biggest things that made it just so life changing was for so many people is how it spread. You already
Yeah.
mentioned it a little bit that there were technological things back then that we don't have now, and I'll get into that later about how it's spreading now. But how did it spread then? Because there was no social media, there was no live streaming of the event. You just mentioned that you had to run to your dorms to make a phone call. So how is it that this spread out throughout the
Well,
nation?
invitations started coming to uh, both formally to the college to send teams of witnesses to churches, to colleges. Um, God traditionally in North America has sent revival to college campuses, and then it spreads back to the home churches of the students and then beyond. And for instance, you ask how did it spread? I can give you an example is that I was asked to go on a witness team to Anderson, Indiana, to the South Meridian Church of God. And of course, then it was Asbury College and it was Anderson College, both universities now. But when we arrived on Saturday evening, I I along with the other guys that were on the team went to the men's dormitories. The girls went to the ladies' dormitories and invited people to the 10:30 service at South Meridian the next morning. And and the place was it was a really big crowd that showed up at South Meridian Church of God. But the service didn't end. All we did was just get up and tell how the revival infected us. We had one singer, uh, Chrissy Sanchez, and she got up and sang without him. She has Latino background, and when she sang "Jesus, oh Jesus," she sang it in English, and then she sang it in Spanish. And somehow, when she sang it in Spanish, it just melted hearts. And she would sing "Cristo, Cristo." It just melted hearts. I don't know why. There was a whole bunch of this. I don't understand why it worked like it did, but there was about two or three different altar invitations for people to come and pray, and uh, it just wasn't people at the altar. There's people every space you could imagine that was in the place was full of people kneeling, and in the aisles. And uh, it turns into kind of a little bit chaotic, not in what's being said or that sort of thing, but people weeping and so many people in one spot praying. And we opened the altar for people, I know at least three times to come, and it was full each time. And finally, they closed it like at 1 o'clock and said to ask us if we'd come back and do a service that night. We did. It was even more people there that night, and and the same kind of thing. Of course, we were a little concerned because we'd said everything we knew to say in the morning service. So what are we going to say? Well, we just said whatever was on our heart, and none of us were. There was just one guy who was a seminary student that led the group, and the rest of us were novices, so we didn't know what we were doing. We just and Chrissy sang her. She sang her song again, and I think she sang some time during the night. She sang "He Touched Me," and then they said to us, "Well, you guys don't have school on Mondays, right?" And we said, "No." They said, "Well, would you do a service Monday night?" We all looked at each other, and we already said tonight what we didn't know to say because we'd said everything we knew to say Sunday morning, but we did. And Monday night, there were people standing because there were no seats left. And same kind of thing, just singing. giving witness, people talking about how, their lives were changed, and then they said to us, "You can go back to Asbury campus now, but we're gonna go on with this." And they went 50 straight days. They say between 5 and 7,000 people gave their lives to Christ during that time period. And, um, wow. And then people like me went on to other places, and every place you'd go and tell about it, it would happen again there. And it was normal to go to a church that had, say 150, 200 people, and to see almost everybody in the place on their knees at the altar, asking God's forgiveness, seeking forgiveness from each other, making restitution, and that's how it spread, and it just kept spreading. People whose lives were changed would go be a witness to what they experienced, and wherever they go and give that witness, it happened there.
Yeah, it's so interesting how that I mean that just happened church to church and just kind of spread like a wildfire. And well, one of the crazy things now is like people don't even know how to report on this. Like they don't even know the verbiage to say. I've went and did a quick Google search on it, and you can see just how people don't even know how to talk about this. And you can tell like the Christian websites know how to word it, but like the mainstream media, you got NBC News, Kentucky Asbury University quote unquote revival going viral on TikTok. They have no idea how to word this and no idea what's going on. It's just very
What
interesting
I
to
read I
me.
read, today, they don't know what to call it. Yeah, and they don't. And here I am 53 years later from the 1970 event, uh, and, I still struggle to find the vocabulary to describe what I experienced then and have experienced. I mean, this shaped my whole life. Um, every time I get up publicly to speak, I expect the same kind of response. Not because of me, but because of what I saw him do when I was a freshman in college, and then what I saw after that as we just I mean, I didn't know how to preach. Uh, you know, I had my witness of what happened, and then I worked on one sermon for months, because I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't want to mess up what I'd seen him do. I didn't want to get in the way, and so it really seemed like the 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 less skilled you were as a presenter, the more God used you. That I would say that's one of the characteristics of this. It's not about professional presentation. It's about people giving witness to the presence of God in their life and what He is doing. And so, people who need every little detail planned out in a service and that sort of thing, they're in trouble. Because this is just bigger than any human being because it's God himself, and so
Yeah, it's just very interesting all that's going on. Now, if I had asked you last Thursday, could the 1970 Asbury Revival have happened again? What would your answer be? And can what's going on now occur even, 20 years from now?
well, the only thing I would, I don't like to correct my grandson here, on this, but this happened in 1950 at Asbury. There's a whole book there on the shelf uh, there in the library studio that you're in on spontaneous revivals at Asbury. and they go back to its Genesis, to its beginning, and the author lists all the different times revival has come. I would say that the 1971 was the most impactful up to this one, but a lot of it had to do with, okay, today technology and people are live streaming this revival right now. They're looking, and they didn't have that in '70s. So I think this has the potential to be more impactful. And in 1970, we had uh, it was enhanced because people could travel easier. Uh, we had more dependable transportation, both vehicles and people. I mean, colleges who wanted to have the witness from the '70s, they flew campus leaders, all the way to California, and then eventually into other countries, and so I think this particular one has the potential uh, to spread around the globe. I think it's already doing that, but for some reason, Asbury has been a. It's not been the only place that God has brought revival to the college campus, but I don't know any school that's had it more often than, and they don't plan them. I mean, they do plan events, where they have music and preaching for a week or something like that. But uh, this is, the title of that other book is Spontaneous Revivals, where it's not planned, he just shows up.
Yeah, shout out to your book. He just showed up where I think you give your story of the 1970 revival as well.
Yeah.
Um, so last question for you. How important is this moment right now that you think is going on? What do you think would be some of the biggest aftershocks of this event right now?
Well, the '70 revival was during one of the most turbulent times uh, up to that point in the history of the United States, as far as uh, the they just burned the ROTC building down on the University of Kentucky campus just in the weeks prior to the '70 revival. It was just a time of chaos throughout the country, especially on college campuses where they were protesting the Vietnam War and all that. And God brought, for our country, this revival came, here to Kentucky and then spread all over the East Coast and West. And at the same time, out in California, the Jesus movement or the Jesus revolution happened. And it was the same era, same time, and they kind of combined, and it brought the message of Jesus, love, unity, peace, shalom, uh, into a very chaotic culture. I think this that we're experiencing today has the same possibility. Uh, our country, our world is in such a mess, and here are people standing in line, long lines to get into a building because God has showed up in that building. And so they have 3 auditoriums going right now, in Wilmore, Kentucky, and people are standing in line, and when they leave, they describe, "I felt peace, I felt loved," you know, and, um, I think it has the potential to bring change to communities and neighborhoods, It has to. It has to. The local churches have to catch fire and do something about their neighborhood, and they have to do something different than what we've been doing, because what we've been doing, for the most part, hasn't worked. Now you have one of the differences is I think as a result of the 70s, you have mega churches. You have these large congregations of 100, of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, or more. Those did not really exist in the 70s. There were some, but they were exception. And um, you know, one of the results, I think, of that whole era is that you have interdenominational churches, the more community churches, because revival doesn't care about the name on the door, and there's a unity that comes. I mean, here's all these people sitting in these three auditoriums in Wilmore and other college campuses now. I today, I heard the report in our prayer meeting of 24 college campuses that are experiencing revival. Nobody is talking about what denomination they are or what church they go to. They're talking about Jesus. And that's one of the characteristics of true revival is the unity of the believers, the followers of Christ. And so, and we live in a culture in the United States and other countries where we're so nasty to each other. You can't already make a statement without somebody disagreeing with you in a nasty way. Well, you know, this is the opposite of that. And so I really believe that there's a potential if the local church it catches on fire as a whole, uh, there's a potential that communities and neighborhoods and countries will be changed. And um, so I find it extremely exciting and thus far really encouraged.
All right. I'd like to thank you for your great words here, and I'd like to thank you for your time. Everyone needs to make sure they can go check out Conversations with Gary. That is his YouTube channel. It's also on other podcasting platforms. Make sure you go check it out. Dr. Gary Wright, I thank you for your time.
And also on Spotify, they can go to a podcast where uh, one of the gentlemen who I invited to the Anderson revival, uh, his life was changed. And he has a Spotify show, me and my 88 friends, which he's a keyboard player. So those are his 88 friends. But Lawrence Tuning, and he and I, he interviewed me like you did uh, several years ago, and then again yesterday. So there's several of us out there trying to spread the word that this seems to be an awakening of unusual proportions.
All right. All right. Thank you for your time.
Love you, buddy.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part two of the Asbury Revival series I got going on right now. Trying to cover what's going on in Asbury, and because I'm doing that, I have a witness to the current one that's going on as of Thursday, February 16th, 2023. You know this guy from previous 8OY videos. This is Caleb Ream, fellow college student and a dear old friend of mine
Hi.
to this day. Caleb, how are
Hi.
you doing on this day?
First of all, I wish it was April. That would mean that school is almost over. But other than that, I think I'm doing pretty well. Tired. We're getting down to how our school works is one quarter, so we're getting down to the second to last quarter before the year's over. So we're getting there. We're getting there. I'm tired, overworked. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm doing college myself, not doing as great as I wanted to, but it's chugging along and it's making it. So, is what it is.
No, I get that.
Life is
I
life.
feel it. I feel it. We're actually both in the same, not the same speech, but we're both taking speech at the same time. So common ground of misery.
Yeah. So we've been sharing our experiences. I was trying to earn some bonus points in my speech class by actually trying to do it here in the studio. So hopefully that does something for me grade wise.
Hey, well,
Since I've barely met the time requirement at all.
you gotta mooch a little bit off of your situation, right?
You gotta do something different. You gotta stand out.
Yeah, that's right. You're all online, right?
Yeah.
You're
Well,
only
it's a
online.
Zoom class, so you do it through Zoom. So you got to present through Zoom and everything. So
Hey,
I was able to do my visual aids on the TV just like I do every time for A to Y.
you got a little bit of a step up in the
Yeah,
competition.
yeah. Having a microphone and everything can help too.
Yeah, more professional.
So that's enough about us and what's going on. So between us, that is. So for those of you who don't know, and it's finally after like a week being covered by major news outlets, who don't even know how to go about covering it. It's kind of ridiculous. They're like losing their stuff. They have no
Yeah,
idea what's going on, and they have no idea how to recover it. When you agree
right.
with that, Caleb?
What?
That the major media just has no idea how to cover what's going on right now.
Yeah, yeah. No, I would agree with that. We watched a news segment maybe 2 or 3 days ago, and they were pretty much speechless.
So I actually have something to show how the media has no idea what they're doing here. If you just Google Asbury Revival, here's what pops up. Now, the Christian websites, as you can see, kind of know what's going on. They're like, I know, Asbury professor, we're witnessing a surprising work of God. But NBC News, Kentucky Asbury University revival, in quotes, going viral on TikTok. They just have no idea what's going on here. They have no idea how to go about wording it.
Well, I'm not sure. Well, I'm not going to point at faith or at people's personal faith or anything like that, but I wouldn't see how a non-faith driven news network could cover something like that in the entirety of it.
So, what is going on? It's at Asbury University in Wilmore, Kentucky. It's a couple miles from where you and I went on vacation in Lexington, and you just went there yourself. So, what's going
Yeah.
on?
So we spent between 8 o'clock at night and about 12:30 a.m. there, and so it was a lot of singing, intermediate, like little speeches, not speeches, but little talks. People giving testimonies and bits about their life, and a lot of young people, a lot of people, college age, high schoolers. You see a lot of entire families there. You see also people who probably were there or at least the college age when the first revival happened at Asbury back in the 70s. It's a great mix of people. It's a very lively atmosphere. I mean, it's pretty cool. It was pretty cool to see firsthand. You hear about like, Billy Graham, revivals and, stuff like that happening back in the time, and to have something maybe not as equivalented to that, or as equivalented to a Billy Graham revival, maybe so, happen in the 21st century with a bunch of college students. It's pretty cool.
So yeah, like in just the quick Google searching that I did, you can see that it's just a lot. It's a lot of people hanging around this auditorium, and it actually kind of looks the same. I have a picture if I can get it to work. Um, of the
Oh yeah,
I'll do an overlay, but that the chapel they're doing it literally looks the same as the 1970 revival. And there's a nice little
yeah,
picture of my grandfather when he was there, and what he looked like when he was there. It's just kind of crazy that it's happening again.
right.
Um, Same thing is happening again, and it seems to start even the same way. It was just kind of this spontaneous thing where they had a prayer meeting, and then they had a different feeling going about it, and then it started, and it's not stopped. I can remember the early Facebook posts saying revival watch day 3, and then now it's all the
Yeah,
way up to like day 8 or something. It's crazy
yeah.
what's going on.
It's over a week now,
Yeah,
a little
it's
bit over a week.
yeah, and I've started rehearing about it, I should say, because like Christian influencers such as Taylor Ransom, who is one of the reasons why this podcast started. Shout out to him with the old Frick Frack podcast. Everyone should go check it out, even though it's discontinued tragically. Taylor, bring back Frick Frack if he watches. But yeah, he's going, his friends going, all these Christian influencers are gathering to Wilmore, Kentucky to go to this atmosphere, go to this revival going on. So Caleb, why were you there? Why did you drive from Ohio to Kentucky,
It
south of
was
Lexington, to go to this revival?
after school. Uh, what day was it now? What would have been Tuesday night? It was after school Tuesday night, and my folks were heading down to it to experience it because they grew up in kind of the in between era, off the coattails of the Billy Graham Crusades and Promise Keepers and all that kind of stuff, and have wrote it out. And people that age and older have been waiting because they were our age and younger when all this stuff was going on. And it for them, it's was kind of a reminiscent, but also wanting to see how 21st century kids could run something like that, and not run it, but how they were reacting in their own spiritual light to something like this. So they were going out of curiosity, um spiritual, you know driving them to go. It's with my folks, on calls and stuff from school. I'm home at home right now, but calls, and all that kind of stuff. That's all they've talked about. So they were heading down after work, and I was getting off of school. They asked me if I wanted to meet them in Cincinnati, and headed down together. Been a week or so since I saw them last, so it was kind of a family bonding time. But very late night. We didn't get back home till about 5:15 in the morning. But it was cool. It was cool for somebody who hasn't seen something like that before, and also to see people who grew up in the revival age of the 80s and 90s, when the crusades and stuff were happening, to kind of be back in that light again, in a time where people probably didn't think it could happen, once again, kind of at the coattails of faith and religion and all that in 21st century society. So it was pretty cool, and that's why I was there.
Yeah, so I mean, this thing is reaching out to people all over. I've talked. I was in prayer meeting this morning, and I was with my grandfather. He was in it, and he was a witness to the first one, and he graduated from Asbury, so he obviously has quite a few connections. And there was also another person on prayer meeting, so you guys should go check out this first video to catch all these details. But there was another person there on the prayer meeting who was brought to Jesus by my grandfather by going as part of the revival. They would take all the witnesses to the Asbury revival, throw them on buses, and then bus them out and or fly them out to other churches and college
Right,
campuses to spread it, the effect
right,
of it. And that's how it grew back in 1970. They bust out, fly out people. He talked about how they would go to their dorms because that's where the phones were, and they would like call their families, and their families would go to Christ. That's how it spread. And it's just kind of important to assess this moment right now and how it's going on. I mean, it's being live streamed. There are 3
right.
auditoriums on Asbury right now. Classes
Yeah,
have
and
resumed, and yet people from all over are gathering to this little college campus in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky.
yeah, to add on to that, the night that we were there, they had set up a jumbotron out in the I don't know what you call it, like the oval of the university, like where all your oldest buildings and stuff were, and they had people packed out there too. So you have surrounding churches, owned by the university, the seminary there, as well as just city churches over flooding. They had opened up the doors to 2 more churches in the town the day that we went, like earlier that day, plus the jumbotron out in the outside, because it was like a 90, or not 90, but 70, 80-degree day there.
Yeah, and I was talking to another friend about this, and we're deep believers ourselves. and it was actually Asher Lou who's been on the show a few times. We were like, because our parents are heavily invested in what's going on, and we were just talking amongst ourselves, and we're like, we can't really see the big deal here. And as I've been thinking about it today, and as I've been researching it today, it's dawned upon me that the experience of being that close in a setting where God is in the room just that much is unexplainable to most people. And
Right.
if you haven't gone through it yourself, you have no idea how it's like and how to explain it. And as someone who's
Right.
had it happen to myself, I mean, I just had a speaker come to my local church the other day that had a message so powerful that when the band came on, God filled the room so much it left me in my chair weeping. It's just an undescribable sensation. And so people all around who have the capabilities are currently going to Asbury to have this
Right.
experience because God is sitting on that campus so heavily right now. It's
Right.
crazy.
And expanding out, we have a school here in Ohio called Cedarville who some students just returned from Asbury and they started something there as well. Have you heard like of Lee University in Tennessee and all those?
No, but I mean, if that's what's going on, that's just like what happened in 1970. These students are fleeing the campus, not fleeing, they're leaving the campus and they're spreading it.
Right.
As my
Right.
grandfather says, the Aslan is on the move, and people are commenting on Facebook everywhere that the Lion of Judah is roaring. I can
Right.
kind of see it now. I can see that why it's a big deal. People are seeing Jesus in a way that's not happened in recent history. I mean, obviously you have the 1970s, but that was 53 years ago now, 1970, when it
Right.
happened. I was
Right.
obviously not alive.
Not even a thought. Your parents were probably just being becoming a thought.
My parents weren't even alive. My
No,
grandparents
I
weren't even married yet.
well, that's true. I guess maybe that'd been thought of, but maybe not that way.
So it's wild to think about, and we got to really appreciate the moment we're in. So and we're kind of covering this right now. Caleb, why do you think it is spreading so much?
I think because certain individuals who have attended the revival, this is a personal, this is me saying what I think, but I think that God appointed people at the revival to be the fishers of men and go out, who were moved in a certain way, but also know how to communicate that feeling to people and communicate and know the need for that, type of movement at other places. I think he has sent these specific individuals or groups of individuals out, you know, specifically touch them and sent them where it is needed, to where it is needed. How about yourself?
I kind of already hit on this. It's unexplainable truly what's going on if you haven't been around something like this. So you can't put it into words. But
Right.
I think people are finally realizing that their lives don't have that fullness, that their lives are lacking in certain ways, and they're searching for things to happen. And when you see this auditorium full of people, you're naturally curious as to what's going on. So right now they have it live streamed and it's being posted everywhere, and all those students are posting about it. And then finally,
Oh
all the
yeah.
major news outlets are covering it. It started, with the college sharing it, and then alumni sharing it, and then it worked its way up to religious commentators sharing it. Now it's all the way up to NBC. So
Right.
it's just spreading like wildfire, which kind of leads me to the question. I asked my grandfather this, who's at the first the 1971, and he told me that wasn't even the first revival to happen at Asbury. You
Oh
guys should go
really?
watch the video, but apparently it happened in 1950 and beforehand. So we
Wow.
really need to. That shows that it can't happen and it can't be repeated. So Caleb, ask you: do you think what's happening right now? It's not even over yet, but do you think this could be repeated again in the future?
Well, yeah, I do believe so. If the spirit moves in that way and moves people in that way, I think it could be.
Do you
So
think? I
yes,
think it could be too.
yes,
I definitely agree.
yes.
But it certainly seemingly requires the right circumstances and the right people at the right time. And it really
Right.
do it. Ultimately, that just translates to God's intervention in the situation.
Right. Right.
So we're really flying through these questions here I had for you. How important do you think that this moment is certainly in this moment, and then maybe even in history?
I think it is important because our generation and maybe you know Gen Z and the late millennials in the 90s, haven't had the kind of exposure to this kind of s- you know events that past generations have. Our country went has gone steadily, down like the rest of the world in church attendance and evangelists and speakers and stuff. Billy Graham was on the scene for 60 years and was on fire for those 60 years. And we had promise keepers and you had revivals here and there. And to why I think it's important at this point in history is because it's kind of like um like we God knows that we are steadily heading away from that direction. And we need to get back to where we have been. And with the trials that this new generation are facing, that new older generations didn't have much in the way of dealing with, social media and political ideological divides, a world that's very uncertain. It's kind of like a creating a faith driven backbone to a whole new generation. And it's kind of like it's passing on that kind of faith to the next generation because like I've said multiple times before, the 90s and 80s kids had the tail end of the Graham era and Promise Keepers and stuff like that. And this is, I think, is our generation's moment and our generation's, you know, our time for an event such as that. The early 2000s, the kids who are in college right now, the kids who are also right now old enough to realize what is happening, but maybe who aren't college age. It's setting up and igniting something in their heart, you know, for them to carry on like those past generations have, giving them a reason to, continue on with their walks or discover, and begin their walks.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. My grandfather just mentioned over and over that this needs to be carried to the local church, the way it was before, and I truly agree with that. What I think this moment could be extremely important. I just can't. I'm trying to think of the best word here, but I think it could be a catalyst in history if it is capable of being followed through in the right way. One of the reasons why
Right,
I do this show is I hope to create more A to Ys. I hope to create more people passionate about the Gospels and about the truth of Jesus, that they can share it and spread it and live by the way that the Bible teaches you. And I think
right,
that this moment, if followed through properly upon, can expose people to Jesus in a new way that hasn't happened before through social media. And I think I've already seen it inspire others to be more bold in their faith, because now there are others among them, and people are kind of seeing, as people gather to Wilmore, they're seeing that there are more like you. You are not alone in this, and
right,
people are starting to become braver, and they're starting to be
right,
willing to be more and speak out and do more as people of faith. If this moment is followed through upon, this could be just as important, if not more, than the 1970 revival.
right. Generation in need of, you know, something like that. And we're the next generation that in need of something like that, obviously.
It's just like I advocate on the show. People need something more to them than themselves to live for, and the scriptures can offer that. If you follow the gospel and you follow the truths of Jesus, you will have more to live for than just yourself, which is the rut that so many people are falling in today. They're just worried about themselves. But if you can look outside of yourself into something bigger, something greater, it's just like the team effect. If you're on a team and you lose your individuality and you start worrying about how the team wins, you're starting to think about greater things than yourself. And that's how you lead to team success. And that's how you will lead yourself to more success as a human being, when you start to think outside of yourself and how you can deliver the gospel and the truths that you read to the world.
Right. No, I'm on board with that. I agree with that.
We're all called to be lights in the darkness, and I think that this moment is shining bright and is creating more lights along the way.
exactly. It's giving a new generation the armor they need to keep going on. That's what I look
Okay.
at it as.
Yeah. So do you got any closing thoughts for us?
No, I think it's amazing. And in our lifetimes, it would be really cool to see something like this again.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I would definitely love it to happen again, but I would like this moment I don't really want it to end. I want it to continue. I hope maybe
Right.
it goes for the rest of the semester. That would be fantastic. Just
Yeah.
amazing. But I don't think that will happen. But one can hope. Uh
Take
and
it
yeah,
all in. It's hard to come
take it
by.
all in, be inspired, and go out and try to do more. Take notice of what's going on, and maybe do some soul searching and figure out what you can do.
All right. Cool.
All right, Caleb, I'd like to thank you for your time here at Ada Y. And ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next time.
See ya.